Oh, it's cold as hell out there. I've got to keep moving, or I'll freeze. I know. I'll play a Wii game. Like Cursed Mountain. Yeah. This game was out there. Almost like it wanted me to find it. I'd say that this is a hidden gem, and it's certainly a unique experience. This game really makes you use the Wii motion controls, but if that isn't your thing, there was also a PC version of this game, only physically released in Europe, that replaces the Wiimote actions with computer mousepad movements instead. This makes it a lot easier to play, but we will be looking at the Wii version here. The game begins in the Tibetan Himalayas with Frank Simmons and his climbing partner, Paul Ward, scaling the mountain Chomolonzo. The group has been hired by a wealthy expedition organizer, Edward Bennett, in an effort to retrieve a Terma artifact from the mountain. Chomolonzo itself is believed by the locals of the area to be the embodiment of the goddess Pauden Lamo, and the Terma artifact is believed to contain the power to bring eternal life. As the group draws closer to the summit, Frank seems to have an argument with his climbing partner Paul. It doesn't go well, and Frank storms off alone towards the cold mountain peak, as dark shadowy figures loom towards him. Frank's brother, Eric Simmons, has now come to the city of Lando, searching for his now missing brother, Frank. The once busy and bustling town is now eerily deserted, and Eric proceeds on regardless of superstitions. His first point of interest is meeting Edward Bennett for information about his brother's mission. Quickly we see that Eric is asserted on the right path, as the trail leads Eric to an item that his brother left behind, Frank's pickaxe. This must be a spare because Frank definitely had climbing gear atop the mountain, unlike Eric, who seemingly didn't bring a pickaxe on a trek to rescue his mountaineering brother. Anyway, that's not all Eric just inherited from his brother, as the same dark and shadowy figures that followed Frank now loom over Eric. These dark passengers threaten Eric unless he moves cautiously. If not, Eric could disappear like everyone else in Lando City. Whilst exploring Lando, clues left behind indicate that the locals believed Frank's expedition was doomed from the start, and it starts to feel like this recovery operation could suffer the same fate. Lando is filled with the dead, and the dead seek to take Eric into their ranks. A ghost apparates aggressively towards Eric, but a timely intervention from a monk, Fodpar, rescues Eric. Fodpar instructs Eric to awaken his third eye to fight the ghosts. Using this power, Eric can use his apparently magically imbued pickaxe to vanquish ghosts and cleanse corrupted altars, which allows Eric to heal his spirit with calming incense at purified shrines. Then, just as quickly as Fodpar swooped in for the save, Fodpar quickly vanishes. Eric delves deeper into the deserted city, battling ghosts along the way. Soon Eric uncovers an item to upgrade the power of his ice axe. Eric discovers a magical Katrika ritual flaying knife, which when attached to his axe can be used to unlock magical sigils that seal things like doors and other obstructions. Personally, I don't know why an axe needs magic to get past something like a wooden door. It's an axe, it can cut wood, but I guess the seals are magic, so the axe needs to be more magic to get past them? Anyway, in addition to your regular attacks with the weapon, this upgrade also lets you blast enemies with powerful projectile beams, so that helps with busting ghosts, and yes, busting makes me feel good. So with this newfound power, Eric can slip by the enemies which have been following him and meet up with Edward Bennett for some answers. Eric learns that Bennett's own attempt to get the Terma artifact failed and cost him his leg, so he hired Frank to procure it for him. Eric also locates a ritual bell that belonged to Frank, and now with more information as to where Frank went, Eric must follow in his brother's footsteps and cut down more ghostly opposition as he follows those clues. Eric learns and gathers all the information he can find which directs him towards Chukwu village for more answers from Jogini Jomo Menmo, who met with his brother before Frank disappeared. The village is dead quiet and heavily obstructed. The ghosts set against our hero lay in wait to deter him at every possible turn. The ghosts tried to fend off Eric with a slew of fiendish traps and devilish puzzles, but our hero is undeterred, and with persistence and a steely resolve, and a lot of ghost busting, Eric pushes past the heavy opposition, and carefully and courageously navigates his way onward to seek out Jogini Jomo Menmo. Eric cuts his way through the darkness towards a guiding light. Here Eric finds Jomo Menmo and gives her Frank's ritual bell. Menmo reveals that Frank came this way and was working with her apprentice Mingma in order to satisfy the rituals necessary to climb the sacred mountain. Menmo then proceeds to a ritual area to speak with the goddess of the mountain, Powden Lamo. Menmo listens to the goddess and then accuses Frank of angering the god, so she demands Eric's blood as recompense. Jomo Menmo drops Eric down to a chasm, and Eric has a precarious trip battling the forces of darkness back to stable footing. Just when Eric thinks he's out of the dark, Eric encounters and now must battle a big bad bird spirit. When Eric gets past the beastly bird, he tries to make his way back up the mountain, but the brawling bird has other ideas and still harrows Eric, casting him back down into the dark. But Eric doesn't give up and works his way back towards Menmo. Menmo then scolds Eric for bringing the spirit back with him, and orders Eric to defeat the spirit once and for all. The contest with the spirit is intense, but Eric is undaunted and manages to stick it to the bird spirit. Once the creature is defeated, Eric claims a weapon upgrade empowerment for his Katrika from the creature's remains, which allows him to break down barriers that lie ahead. Menmo, seeing Eric's performance, is now somewhat calmed compared to earlier. Menmo then performs another ritual, and she warns of a dark journey ahead, and informs Eric that the goddess is undecided on Frank's fate. With that, Eric finds hope that he may still be able to save his brother, assuming that Eric hasn't just gone mad. Eric now sets out to reach Nyan Dekaibuk Monastery to find Fodpa, but the harsh environment and even deadlier opposition holds Eric back. As Eric cuts through the dead on his path to the monastery, the ghosts of the past continue to confront him. Eric is in dire need of assistance, but at this point, it could seem that Eric's luck is turning, as Eric finds a weapon, a Kila ritual dagger, and this weapon is certainly a cut above. The Kila can be slow, but it is very powerful, and with this weapon in hand, Eric can hack and slash the dead away as he moves onward. But as Eric begins to feel secure, armed and dangerous, a new and more dangerous foe stalks our hero. A flying ghost emerges and attempts to slaughter Eric, but Eric uses his newfound power to push the ghost away. After Eric collects himself, Eric presses on to find Fodpa in the Nyan Dekaibuk Monastery. Eric finally arrives at the Nyan Dekaibuk Monastery in search of Fodpa, but the place is crawling with the dead. Ghosts and flying ghosts seek to slay Eric at every turn, and the monastery itself is like a labyrinth, filled with puzzles and mystery at every turn. Eric must tread carefully to catch up to Fodpa and get some answers about his brother, but with so many hazards and danger looming around every corner, Eric is going to need some help to make it out alive. Perhaps Eric's luck is turning, however, as Eric uncovers a timely new weapon, the Langpa Ritual Hand. A handy weapon indeed that lets Eric get a hold of the evil that stands in his way. The Langpa unleashes a kind of spiritual rope that can ensnare and quickly defeat some enemies in combat, and it must be used against certain creatures like the powered-up flying ghost boss that blocks Eric's progression to Fodpar. With the guidance of Fodpar and using the Lang Pa, Eric can dispatch a Shrine Keeper ghost boss, and Eric finally gets to talk with Fodpar unaccosted. With this, now Eric is able to put some of the pieces of this mystery together. Bennett had found out from Fodpar, as he studied newly uncovered ancient scrolls, about the Terma artifact and its powers. Greedily, Bennett quickly set out to climb Chomalonzo himself, before the rest of the scrolls could be translated, as Bennett hastily wished to gain control of the Terma before anyone else could. But Bennett fell to the mountain and lost his leg. Bennett then summoned Frank to do the deed for him, and in this time, as the ancient scrolls were studied further and deciphered, Bennett believed that Frank fit the description of a translated prophecy about the Terma's retrieval. Bennett believed that, unlike Bennett, Frank would actually be able to ascend the mountain. But in his haste, Frank did not complete the necessary 12 ritual walks required before his ascent. So instead, Frank went through a series of rituals with Menmo's apprentice Mingma as a shortcut. After some time, Mingma fell in love, which seemingly invalidated the rituals, and Frank climbed the mountain anyway, refusing to repeat the process. This act cursed the expedition, and released ghosts from the Bardo, which is a transitional realm between life, reincarnation, and nirvana. Fodpar reveals that Frank's spirit may be trapped in the Bardo, but he can return. Fodpar then instructs Eric to take a sacred scroll to and seek out the Lama of Dirge Gonchen Monastery for information on how to proceed. Eric then presses on, in an effort to contact the abbot of Dirge Gonchen Monastery, but not without the continuous feeling of unease, as if eyes in the shadows are always on his back. In this instance, a fear of the dark is justified, as out of the darkness, ghosts haunt Eric and try to block his path to the light. When Eric reaches the Dirge Gonchen Monastery, Eric discovers that Bennett has made his way there as well, and seems to be one step ahead of Eric. The abbot insists to Bennett that he is unsure about the Terma prophecy that Bennett believes in, but Bennett is raving about the immortality powers possible with the Terma treasure he seeks. An angry Bennett proclaims that his man, Paul, is still looking for Frank, and may find him before Eric is able. Bennett scowls at the monks, claiming that they have failed him, and the treasure he seeks shall still be his, even if he has to go and get it and procure it himself. And then a furious Bennett skulks away, shouting at Eric as he leaves about his intent to make the base camp of Chomalonzo. When Eric reaches the abbot tells Eric that he is not yet ready to climb the mountain, but if Eric meditates with the abbot in the chanting hall, the abbot can teach Eric how to enter the Bardo, and possibly save his brother. The abbot then reveals that Frank did indeed pass into the Bardo alive, using the Terma artifact. The abbot then tells Eric that he must be enlightened to pass through the Bardo, and that he will face trials on his journey, and must overcome the deities inside that realm, and a Lord of Death which will seek to pass judgment over him. With this in mind, Eric enters the twilight of the Bardo. Inside of the Bardo, Eric is put to the test, and Eric has to summon all of his courage, mental fortitude of mind, and willpower to withstand the tests put to him. Inside this place, Eric will have to battle a gigantic boss creature in order to prove himself. This creature is giant, many-armed, and ready for battle. It traps Eric in a magical barrier and sets out to pulverize him. But if Eric can avoid getting hammered by this creature's massive fists, or caught by the creature's magical blasts, Eric can fight back against the boss. And as the battle progresses, the creature brings down the arena around them in a second stage of boss battle. In this second stage, the creature goes full on beast mode and isn't holding back. The creature now leaps around the more open area it created, unleashing waves of multiple projectiles hurtling towards Eric as it moves. But undaunted, Eric is able to take down the boss after an arduous and hard-fought battle. With the boss defeated, Eric can claim his reward. From the remains of this great creature, Eric claims the Corlo. Essentially, this is a spread shot weapon, in a similar fashion to the final projectile attack of the boss. It's pretty badass. Good for multiple targets, but weaker against single targets. It's quite the upgrade, and it will certainly aid Eric in making it to his brother. As Eric returns from the task, the abbot tells Eric that Eric is now ready to climb the sacred mountain, and he must go now whilst there is still time. Eric moves on to the path towards the mountain's base camp. It's a steep journey with ghastly ghosts and flying ghosts against Eric, and the path is also steeped with dangerous climbs and evil traps to navigate. As Eric heads towards the base camp, he discovers the body of Mingma covered in the snow. Eric recovers her protective amulet, and as Eric grasps this item, Eric seems to be able to experience flashes in his mind of what had transpired. Eric learns that Bennett killed Mingma in a rage as she attempted to flee. With the knowledge that Bennett is a cold-blooded killer, Eric moves on through the cold snow, and the ghosts continue to come after him, and so does that creeping cold, and Eric has to keep moving regardless to avoid becoming frozen. The cold winds chill Eric to the bone, but Eric knows he's on the right path to find his brother and continues to move on. And move on Eric does, past the bodies of those who fell to the mountain in the biting cold, and their spirits which linger there still. Eric must fight through them unless he wants to join them. As Eric climbs higher, an old friend drops by, and by that I mean that dark-winged bird spirit monster Eric fought previously that flew away. I was hoping we wouldn't see that thing again, but I guess it's time to settle the score, once and for all, for this unfinished business. And so a boss battle ensues, except this time, instead of the bird spirit sending Eric down the mountain, it's Eric who drops the bird and sends it down below. Once the boss is finally defeated, Eric claims Aquila empowerment for his weapon, and once again sets his sight towards the summit of Chomalonzo. Well, he would do if our nemesis, the dastardly bird spirit, hadn't survived another encounter yet again, and yet again manages to knock Eric down in a final defiant act to the dark below. Eric awakens, alive, but trapped inside an icy crevasse. So Eric painfully gets up, with everything hurting, looking for a way to escape. The crevasse is filled with the ill-fated dead climbers that came before Eric, and they met a dire fate here themselves. Many of whom fell to the elements and hazards of this place now hunt Eric mercilessly. But not all out here are out to harm. Fortunately, Eric finds a walkie-talkie on a dead mountain climber, and a friendly voice of Paul helps guide Eric to safety. Eric escapes the crevasse and marches on towards base camp, but the dead have not forgotten Eric and continue to hunt him down. As Eric slips past the ghosts, he comes to ground with where Frank and Mingma conducted their rituals in preparation for the climb. Eric once again experiences flashes of past events. he sees Frank and Mingmar as they are secretly observed by Bennett. The rituals taxed Frank's patience, and he grew more impatient as time went on. Mingmar professed her feelings, that she had fallen in love with Frank's climbing partner Paul, and that her feelings may have doomed the ritual. Mingmar begged Frank to start the rituals again, but angrily Frank scolded Mingmar, and then Frank marched on to the mountain regardless, refusing to waste any more time lest the artifact he seeks be lost. As Mingmar left, Bennett, watching on, was furious and wrathfully chased Mingmar down with a knife. And we know the rest. Eric sets out from this discovery, facing opposition with the ghosts and high altitude before him. But Eric is as equipped and ready as he'll ever be to bring this madness to an end. Eric catches up and confronts Bennett and Paul, who are arguing in the misty snow. Bennett accuses Paul of seducing Mingmar and blames Paul for all the misfortunes that resulted. But Eric fills in Paul to Mingmar's fate at Bennett's hands, and presents Mingmar's amulet necklace as evidence to the fact. With the truth out in the open, Bennett changes into his final form, and turns into a demonic monster for his sacrilege. Bennett slaughters Paul, and sets his sight on Eric next. Demon Bennett quickly teleports around Eric, striking with opportunity and getting out of dodge. Bennett also summons and controls the dead to do his dirty work whilst the battle goes on. After Eric handles the dead and gets some amount of payback on Bennett, Bennett takes his offense to another stage and unleashes charged lightning blasts onto Eric. But as long as Eric keeps moving, he can avoid the blasts and strike back at the demon Bennett. And strike back Eric does, dissipating the demon Bennett and getting some manner of revenge as well. With victory comes the spoils, and Eric picks from the remains some high altitude climbing gear and an empowerment for his caller weapon to maximize its power for destroying evil spirits. Eric continues into the void of cold and snow. The air is getting thin, and Eric relies on oxygen tanks from previous expeditions to stay alive at this altitude. There's no time to catch your breath up this high, as Eric has to keep moving or he'll freeze. And any resources like oxygen tanks or incense sticks to burn at shrines to recover are fiercely guarded by evil spirits. And the mountain is littered with evil dead, like ghosts, flying ghosts, and even summoner spirits that call in ghostly reinforcements to swarm our hero as he scales precarious heights and battles overwhelming forces. But Eric is undaunted. He's made it this far, and he can't stop until he reaches the top. There's no turning back now, so Eric has to move forward. As Eric presses on, he sees visions of Frank on his way up the mountain, and as Eric fights his way through another serious summoner spirit and its horde of ghosts that it rises, Eric makes it far enough to glimpse to where Frank discovered the Terma artifact. Eric lets in the visions once again, to cast some light onto the past events and see what happened. Frank found the Terma and claimed it for himself, but his partner Paul warned him of an oncoming storm, and pleaded for Frank to leave the Terma where he found it, as Paul knew taking it would anger the goddess. Frank had changed, and Paul's pleas fell on deaf ears. Frank set out to summit Chomolonzo and used the Terma to enter the Bardo with the promise of eternal life for himself, and Paul was forced to descend to avoid the oncoming storm. And from there, we know the rest. With this in mind, Eric moves on to catch up to his ill-fated brother. But before Eric can find his brother, a final showdown with a summoner spirit comes calling. Eric uses all the power he can muster against the elements to put the dead to rest. And then Eric leaves these enemies behind him as he moves on to the peak of Chomolonzo. As Eric reaches the way beyond The storm is terrible, and the mist and snow make visibility a daunting task. The battle against the elements is unyielding, but Eric bravely puts one foot in front of the other, and step by step, Eric finds his way forward. In the snowy expanse, Eric discovers that he is close to his target. Eric finds Frank's possessions abandoned, and Eric has a vision of Frank changing into ritual robes and discarding his climbing gear and the Terma's ancient container. With this, Eric knows that he is close to a conclusion and to finally put this nightmare to rest. Eric moves on to find his brother and restore sealing away the Terma for good. Eric summits Joe Malonzo and sees a vision of his brother crossing over into the Bardo, whilst Frank's body remains. Frank is somewhere else, fighting his own demons. And now, as the mountain commands, Eric must do the same, as Eric faces a physical incarnation of his inner demons, and this is a big demon boss. As the final battle ensues, this demon lets loose an unstoppable storm. But all is not lost, as Eric can hide from the storm and hit back when it calms momentarily. Eric throws some good hits into the demon, and for a moment, it seems as if the tide has begun to turn. After Eric begins to think he may have gained the upper hand, the demon shows that it is not playing around anymore, and pulls Eric into the Bardo for another stage to this epic concluding conflict. The demon now lets loose all its fury in its final form, unleashing relentless lightning as the storm reaches its climax. But Eric keeps his head down, grits his teeth and fires back, enough to down the demon temporarily. With a chance to end this, Eric rushes to the Terma, and its light banishes the darkness as Eric purges the curse with the Terma, and the world is returned. Frank is also returned to his body. Finally reunited, Eric tries to convince his brother Frank to leave, but Frank, seeing his own demons, questions himself. Why does one climb mountains? To get away from something? Or to find one's true self? Frank doesn't like what he's become, and thinks his true self isn't pretty at all. Frank thinks that he has done all that he can in this life, and wants to move on and try again. With that, Frank chooses to pass on and reincarnate. Eric doesn't know if he's mad, but he does know that this crazy quest is finally at its end, one way or another. And so, Eric leaves Frank's body and the Terma behind, and Eric, somber, but now free of the responsibility and weight of his mission, descends. Frank is where he wants to be, and the curse has been lifted. The world is not ready for the power of the Terma. The goddess shall protect its own. And with that, it's over. This is the end.